Well, hello world. Hopefully the 15th time tonight is a charm and I stop having all the technical difficulties that I've been having every single time I try to start this episode. So I'm a little bit frustrated trying to get this thing working, but you know what? 15th time's a charm and we're going to get rolling right now. So this is Politicos and this is the first podcast. It's actually kind of a spinoff of another podcast I was doing before. And I should probably go into the history of that a little bit. I found myself in a position where after never putting a political label on myself, I decided that, about 2-3 years ago, I was going to stick a political label on myself. Big, huge mistake. And here's a problem with that. And I should have known this. In fact, I did know this. And why the smarter part of my brain didn't stop me from doing it is beyond me. So you put a political label on yourself and you add that political label to the title of your podcast. You tend to get people that also add that political label to themselves following your podcast. And unfortunately, whether you are left, right, center, red, white, blue, whatever the case may be, if you're not left, blue, center, red, or whatever the case may be, in everything that you say, you tend to get bastardized, demonized, etc., etc. See, there's a huge problem with groupthink in political parties, and it's beyond annoying. It's hard to talk to anybody that prescribes to any political agenda nowadays that even seems that they think for themselves, that they're coming up with these ideas on their own. And it's ridiculous. You talk to, I don't care whether it's a Democrat, a Republican, a Libertarian, they're in their boxes, okay? And they can't get out of them. They see the world the way they see it, and that's it. And if you have the occasional one that doesn't follow everything completely, well then, you're not a real Democrat, you're not a real Republican, you're not a real Libertarian. Get the F out of here. Okay, seriously. Groupthink is an awful, awful thing. It's not helping us, it's hurting us. So, that being said, this is about politics. This is my personal political opinions and philosophies. And of course, mine are the right ones, the correct ones. Just like every other correct political philosophy out there. All the correct Democrat ones, all the correct Republican ones, all the correct Libertarian, Green, Freedom, Constitution Party ones. They're all correct, and everybody's got the right answers. The atheists have the right answers. The Christians have the right answers. The Muslims have the right answers. We all have the right answers. But you're listening to me because you know that I have all the right answers. Just like everybody else. No, we have opinions, and that's all we have. There is no right, there is no wrong. It's not zero sum. The world isn't just black and white. The world is gray. So, jumping more into it, a little bit about myself. I spent 8 years in the U.S. military. Yes, served my country. I got out, kind of hung out for a couple years, got bored, got really heavily into politics. Recently, a couple years ago, I started going back to school using my GI Bill. I graduated from a 2-year college in California with a degree in communications, and I finished all my transfer requirements for political science as well. Unfortunately, my college doesn't confer associate's degrees in political science. I am now attending a university full-time where I am working on my dual major in political science and speech communications. So hopefully this is a productive way to kind of put the two together, use the things that I'm learning. I don't even know how to describe it, just put out what I'm learning. And that's actually a huge part of the reason that I am where I am now. The political classes I've taken, some of the best ones were the political philosophy classes, learning about Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, John Stuart Mill, Machiavelli, even going into Karl Marx, just learning everything. And I got to say, out of all the classes that I took in school, that class and that professor specifically, I felt smarter. Now, my other classes, I may have walked out feeling like I knew more, but as far as actually being smarter, being able to use my brain in a completely different way, can't really say that happened too many other times. Well, except for maybe college algebra, but, that just is what it is. Well, there was that. The other half was the fact that I was on my school's competitive speech and debate team and did that for the past year. And one of the things that you really bring away from that is that there are some really smart people out there. And you hear all these differing opinions, and you really got to be able to think outside of your own bubble. When you're handed a debate topic, you may not agree with the topic and side you're given. You may love guns and be asked to argue against guns. You may, love weed and be asked to argue against weed, whatever the case may be. You don't know the topics ahead of time, and you don't get to pick your side in the topic. So you're really forced to, use your brain and, look at things from, I'd like to say a neutral perspective, but, you are taking a side, so there is a definite bias there. But you have to be willing to look at your own beliefs and be able to come up with really good arguments against them. And once you start doing that, once you start coming up with arguments against things that you believe, you start realizing that, wow, that was a very good argument. I just obliterated something that I have been arguing for. And I realized that my argument was not as solid as I once thought it was. But, this is education, and, that's the whole point. That's why we have these programs available, and that's why we learn. So I think a good place to start for this podcast would be to kind of lay out what I think of man and the state. And typically, you read Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, John Stuart Mill, all these guys, Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, they all start the same way: is what is the role of the state? What is man's role? And I kind of like the idea of natural rights. And that's the idea that for more or less, you should be allowed to do whatever you want to do as long as your actions do not hurt another individual or in some other way infringe upon their personal rights. And, kind of looking at that, we get a little more idea of what this is from John Locke. And I actually have the Second Treatise of Government in front of me right now. And I have a line highlighted here from when I took that political philosophy class. And I would, once again, really like to thank that professor because, man, just really opened up a lot knowledge-wise. And not even just that, not even just things that I know now that I didn't know before, but the process of thinking and how to actually examine things in the world around you. So, I really got to thank that professor because I thought I had that down. I mean, we all do, of course. You learn that sometimes you don't. So this is John Locke on the state of nature. And he says, to understand political power right and derive it from its original, we must consider what state all men are naturally in, and that is the state of perfect freedom, to order their actions and dispose of their possessions and persons as they see fit, within the bounds of the law of nature, without asking leave, or depending upon the will of any other man. And that kind of also goes along with what Thomas Hobbes said. I don't have that quote directly in front of me right now. I'll try to pull it up. But He basically says a free man is that in what his strength and wit he is able to do, he is not hindered to do what he has a will to do. And this is, again, going back to the idea of the state of nature. And absent government, absent any kind of rule above the person, you really are free to do just whatever you want. There's no arbitrary force stopping you. So now I think that is a good segue into what politics is, and this is a definition of politics, actually two definitions of politics, from the Essentials of Comparative Politics by Patrick O'Neill. And the definition of politics here is: politics is a struggle in any group for power that will give one or more persons the ability to make decisions for the larger group. I don't think we can really argue with that. He also says that politics is the pursuit of authority to make decisions that will affect the community as a whole. So I think it's a pretty good definition of what politics actually is. Now, moving forward, I'm just going to go ahead and go back to John Locke, and he talks about political power. And what he says is that political power, then, I take it, to be a right of making laws with the penalties of death, and consequently all less penalties, for the regulating and preserving of property, and of employing the force of the community in the execution of such laws, and in the defense of the commonwealth from foreign injury, and all this only for the public good. Well, the one thing I would have to agree with him is that, number one, it has to be for the public good, and number two, the primary role of the state, and again, this is my opinion, my correct 100% right opinion, that the primary role of the state is to protect its citizens from foreign aggression, from foreign threat. Because if you live in a defined geographical area under a government, then you can't really have freedom, the freedom that you want and desire, if you're constantly under threat from outside sources, from foreign entities. And, I think that's one thing that'd be fairly difficult to argue against. So in that sense, there is a very definite and defined role for the state. Now, looking internally, I think we have to go to John Stuart Mill a little bit. And this is from On Liberty, and this is another one that I had highlighted from the class that I took. He says, give me 1 second. He says that the only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. His own good, either physical or moral, is not a sufficient warrant. Okay, so what does this mean? That the state has the right and the responsibility to take action against an individual when his actions are harming others. And I would expand on that to say whether that's physical harm or not, because I can walk into your house and steal all your personal property, and though I may not be physically harming you, I am still harming you in the sense that I am violating your rights. So the state definitely has a role to come in that instance. Now, that will be a very specific point that we will talk about later. And I have a very specific incident that I'm thinking of. And there are people out there that think that under no circumstances should force ever be allowed. And this is the non-aggression principle, one that for the most part I actually subscribe to. And it says that no person or entity has the right to use force against anybody else unjustly. And that, kind of expanding on that you have the right to do whatever you want to do as long as you don't hurt anybody else. That would be the idea of natural rights. Now, I agree.